IVM.
If you had said back in 2015 that people wanted to eat a burger made entirely of plants and crops, but which tastes, smells, sizzles, and even bleeds like a conventional beef burger, even in the beef-crazy United States, people would have thought you were crazy. But that's exactly what Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods did. The reason that the alternative protein ecosystem, and indeed the entire food industry, is so hung up on plant-based burgers is because Beyond and Impossible revealed a deep truth about humans.
Or perhaps they just underlined it because it's one that innovators throughout history have espoused and used to their advantage. That truth is that people have latent needs, and figuring out those latent needs is perhaps the most important thing you can do if you're looking to build something of value or impact. The world's most famous incubator, Silicon Valley-based incubator Y Combinator, has a very simple motto: make stuff people want. It's a great way to encapsulate this insight, understand people deeply, and then satisfy their needs. And sometimes when you're looking to understand people deeply, you can't trust what they say. You have to focus on what they do. As Henry Ford famously said, if he had listened to what people said they wanted, he would have made a faster horse carriage.
Now, when we analyze people's needs, the itch they're scratching, the job that they're trying to do with any tool or product or food, we overwhelmingly find that the best way to predict how new and exciting industries like smart protein will succeed is whether they make products that compete on taste, price, and convenience. They have to taste the same or better, cost the same or less, and be available everywhere meat, eggs, and dairy are currently available. But of course, there's more complexity to it. Food formulators and entrepreneurs have to think about local preferences, formats, labeling, positioning, marketing collateral, early adopters, tone of voice. There's a huge amount of work that goes into making stuff people want.
When Impossible Foods launched in Singapore last year, they were in 140 restaurants within 4 months. But of course, they weren't serving burgers everywhere. Just this past week in July 2020, they announced that they were partnering with Starbucks in Singapore to serve a delicious Impossible rendang pie to go with all the variations in dumplings, buns, and other locally craved foods. By the way, if you're listening in Singapore, you should run, not walk, to the nearest Starbucks and grab one, because the latest plant-based meats rollouts have a habit of just running out very quickly. And don't forget your mask.
But before you go do that, let's dive deeper. Today's guest can help us delve into the complexity of understanding and satisfying people's taste, of figuring out how to make stuff people want, and of going beyond the burger to delicious, diverse foods. Dhruvi Narsaria is GFI India's corporate engagement specialist. She leads our crucial strategic partnerships and industry building work with large corporations and high growth startups, as well as our market and consumer insights work. Dhruvi majored in journalism with a degree in mass media from Jai Hind College, Mumbai, and has been helping brands make connections for over 4 years. Her experience includes heading marketing and partnerships for Wishberry, India's biggest crowdfunding platform for creative artists. She has also consulted in business and creative development for textile, sports, hospitality, and fashion companies in India before joining the Good Food Institute India. Dhruvi is interested in social entrepreneurship and building brands that do good.
Rajya Lakshmi, GFI India's market and consumer insights specialist, focuses on helping us size the market, execute our extensive consumer research agenda, and meaningfully drive the Indian market forward. Now, Raji has over 15 years of experience working in strategy, business insights, and analytics for stalwart consumer brands, including Unilever, AC Nielsen, Aditya Birla Retail, and McDonald's, where, by the way, she played a key role in conceptualizing and launching new categories and products such as the McSpicy, the McFlurry, and Snack Wraps. I'm Ramya Ramurthy, Communication Specialist at the Good Food Institute India.
And I'm Varun Deshpande, Managing Director at the Good Food Institute India. And you're listening to Feeding 10 Billion.
Dhruvi and Raji, welcome to our show.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here and talk more about consumer insights.
Thank you, Ramya. Happy to be here.
Okay, so Dhruvi, when you were last on our podcast on the very first episode of season 1 way back in 2019, we spoke about what you do for GFI India as a corporate engagement specialist, right? And how we were still relatively data dark when it came to figuring out what consumers want, especially in the realm of alternative protein or smart protein. It's been almost a year now to the day. How close are we to answers on what factors affect our perception of all protein products? What would you say about our broad attitudes to food, and how is it evolving versus how it's evolving globally?
Firstly, I can't believe it's been a year because so much has happened in this past year when it comes to the sector of food. We see new launches almost every week, and there's been a lot of accelerated business activity, right? And I think we're much closer now to figuring out the questions that we had outlined in the last episode. So definitely when it comes to things like, for instance, what formats should these products be in? What are the first sort of dishes that consumers will love to see in this category? We're closer to answers. The answers definitely point us towards things which are familiar, things which evoke a certain sense of nostalgia in people, because that's what they especially want in a new category. And especially right now with COVID-19 going around, people are really drawing back to things that they already know and love, maybe just reinvented in different ways. Along with that, we're also closer to figuring out what are the kind of attributes that these products should have to really resonate with consumers. And then again here, there are certain clear winners, things like fragrance, things like visuals, the fact that they have to be very high on their Instagrammable quotient because everyone wants to share what they're eating on social media now. So all these are definitely answers that we have, with a lot more to come as well as our consumer research agenda and our work evolves. Internationally, like you said, there's been so much happening, especially with, Starbucks debuting huge brands like Oatly and Beyond Meat in their menus in China, with KFC launching plant-based chicken nuggets in Hong Kong. There's a lot going on. When it comes to Indian studies as well, there's one that recently just came out from Penn State University, where researchers said that the early adopter audience will be willing to pay a premium for these sorts of products, even in India. So we're hoping that, very soon we have similar sorts of news stories and launches to talk about in India, like we are seeing abroad right now.
Yeah, and the study that you just referenced from Penn State, which was published in the journal Sustainability, also crucially outlined that the early adopter market, or the first buyer market as they call it, is in fact geared towards non-vegetarians, right? So all of these products are geared for people who are trying to eat less meat and want a simple switch, not a sacrifice. And that's, of course, in addition to the work that we've done in India, which does identify that something like 63% of Indians would be extremely likely to try or buy plant-based meat, which is very exciting. But all of this is certainly caught up in uncertainty because we're trying to define or create a new category here, something that's new to the Indian ecosystem. So Raji, Dhruvi already talked about some of the key factors, but what are the key factors we need to consider about Indian consumers before launching a new alternative protein product specifically?
When we look at the Indian consumers from a protein perspective, they are low on both protein awareness and consumption. As per an EAT Lancet report, while we are supposed to consume 30% of our calories through protein, Indians end up consuming only 6 to 8% calories through protein. So this, if we think, happens only in the lower income groups, one of the surveys done by IMRB sometime last year says that almost 70% of the urban rich Indians also are protein deficient. And what's interesting is almost 90% of these consumers are not even aware about their daily protein requirement. So looking at this, I think what we first need to build is the awareness for protein intake in consumers' mind. So once we tackle that, when it comes to developing the product mix, so India as a country is where local tastes and cuisines dominate. So we see a different type of cuisine and then different kinds of flavors from state to state, and sometimes within a state in a few miles. So therefore, we have to keep these nuances in mind when we are developing products. The products that will be compatible with the Indian palate and the products that can be convenient to cook at home. Also, India being an economy with most of the households in the low and then lower and middle incomes, it's also important to keep affordability in mind when we are developing products. So also when we look at the consumption patterns of most of the daily essentials, right from the groceries to FMCG categories and meat, most of these categories are bought by Indian consumers from their neighborhood kirana stores or some neighborhood stores. So therefore, developing products which are compatible for stocking at these outlets is also going to be very, very critical. So hence, looking at all these parameters in mind, creating awareness of protein is going to be critical, followed by creating the right product mix, which includes the right product, right pricing, and right channel mix for development of this sector in India.
Now, Raji, I have to ask you this, given your background. So what are the factors we must weigh before an Indian product takes the QSR route to the mass market? We've seen products from Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods or even Just Egg do this in other markets like US and China and beyond. But what are the factors they need to consider in India before they do this?
So when we look at Indians, we don't eat out as much as our counterparts in the US or in China. For example, an average Chinese consumer eats out about 50 times in a month, vis-a-vis an Indian consumer who eats out only 4 to 5 times in a month. So the number goes up when we look at bigger metros like Mumbai, but it is still 10 to 12 times compared to the 50 times in China. So therefore, eating out market in India is much smaller compared to these markets, maybe about a tenth of their size. However, the Western QSRs, being the format which are like attracted by most of the younger audience and the formats which have aspirational values, can be a definite starting point for the alternative protein sectors, because these formats can help in creating awareness and also can start consumption. So some of the key things that one has to remember for an entry into these QSR are, so the type of audience. The 15 to 24 age group is the age group which frequents these Western QSRs the most. So most of their footfalls are driven by this audience. However, when we look at the profile of this audience, they're typically students or the audience into their first jobs. Therefore, they are low on affordability. So any product which we aim at the QSRs will have to keep this affordability into mind if you are looking at attracting this audience. So we've spoken about the eating out frequency of Indians. So owing to that poor eating out frequency, what happens is when we step out to eat, nutrition or health are not the primary factors that we consider. So what we are looking at is products that are indulgent, products that satisfy my cravings, or products that give me that kind of fillingness. The need states are totally different compared to maybe a more evolved markets. So we'll have to keep these need states in mind when we are developing the products. And lastly, a lot of non-vegetarians, though they love their meat, there are certain days in the week or sometimes weeks together where they don't consume any meat because of religious reasons. I think this is one of the big opportunity segments for alternative protein sector, where it's a similar kind of products that's going to satisfy similar need states and also going to give the consumer similar kind of experience. So I think that's also going to be a good starting point to make an entry into this sector.
So Dhruvi, in our earlier episode together, which Ramya mentioned was season 1, episode 1 of Feeding 10 Billion, you mentioned that in India, we won't have Western solutions, but rather Indian solutions for Indian needs, right? So our hero products are unlikely to just be a burger. In fact, Indians are not a homogeneous customer in the same way that the US is, right? So it's not perhaps possible to definitively identify a single product which will satisfy all levels of the income pyramid, all, in fact, parts of the country or all consumers, right? We might gravitate towards different things. And we talked about biryani as being a potential hero. We talked about keemas, we talked about kebabs. In fact, Swiggy data says that a biryani in 2018 was ordered once every 1.6 seconds. And I think now the data has increased so that 1.6 biryanis are ordered every second in 2019. So how do we identify the right pathway to the heart and the stomach of the Indian consumer?
Yeah, Varun, you're right. I mean, biryanis are really top of mind and top of list when it comes to Indians and the kind of non-vegetarian dishes they love. But one thing that we all must acknowledge when it comes to the heart and the stomach of the Indian consumer is that one size does not fit all. So there will never be one pathway really to actually reach the Indian consumer. You know, we have a different language and a different cuisine every few miles. We have to take into account this diversity. And there are also a lot of core differences that especially brands that are looking to enter the category need to keep in mind when it comes to this diversity. Diversity is not just something to write on your whiteboard while thinking about the Indian consumer. You actually have to take it into account while formulating your products. Because, for instance, you know, there are certain parts of India, like especially in southern parts of India, where people love having their meat with the bone. But in northern parts of India, that's not pretty much, you know, accepted or very, very familiar to consumers there. So these are key things that people need to keep in mind. Having said that, there are certain basics, I think, which relate or are relevant to all of India, which is things like, you know, meat in India, it's not the whole meal. It's a part of a meal. So when I say this, I mean that when brands are looking at formulating products and labeling their products, they should talk about For instance, your newest plant-based chicken tikka, perfect for kebabs as opposed to grilled chicken slices, because that's when you evoke a sense of a familiar dish in a consumer's mind rather than just speak about the meat. So yeah, meat in India definitely being part of the meal and not the whole meal in itself is something that will resonate with the entire Indian consumer set, along with other cues like food in India is a family affair. People in India prefer food which is fresh, which is home cooked. It's a shared ritual. So it's all about people coming together and celebrating and indulging in a meal. So I think these are cues that will resonate, and these should be taken into account along with the diversity that I spoke about earlier.
Thanks for that, Dhruvi. Raji, when we examine existing data on the Indian consumer, what I find interesting is that Indians seem to want to eat like their Western counterparts as our income levels grow, right? But we're also quite traditional, surprisingly, when it comes to certain social norms. And this is something you had presented to us when you joined, that, when it comes to gender roles in marriage or our attitudes to like dating or live-in relationships, or even the frequency of how often we pray, or caste-based adherence to food rules seems to be quite traditional. So we don't also seem to care about environmentalism or animal welfare as much as our global counterparts, perhaps. So what are the need states that we can identify when we're trying to cater to consumers within alternative protein products? Is it the protein deficiency angle? Is it the fact that flexitarians as a market are dormant, but they're huge? Or we just need to identify and tap it? Or is it just what we've been saying all along, right? Taste, price, convenience. This is something we stand by at GFI. Or is it going to be something like novelty?
I think this is something that I think is a puzzle for most of the marketeers. So we as a country, I think, had a strange mix of both conservative and liberal attitudes. So if you look at our youth, majority of them are like modern in their appearance and also their consumption patterns. So they are trying to, or like they want to emulate their Western counterparts. At the same time, we don't have much awareness about the impact of our choices on, say, sustainability or on planet. So also when you look at food, we aren't really high on food neophobia. We are open to exploring different kinds of foods, especially from different cultures and cuisines. But at the same time, we also have reservations about the type of protein, like say a beef or a pork. So even when it comes to the key reasons or the drivers for having meat, so they seem to be more of taste and indulgence and cravings than health. So looking at all of this, there is not going to be like one need state that meat consumption satisfies in India. And similarly, there won't be one need state that the alternative protein sector would cater to. Like we've discussed in the earlier sections, where there is huge protein deficiency in India. So maybe as an overarching theme, we could have protein deficiency. However, under that, there will be a lot of subsegments that one has to look at. So there will be different types of consumers. Say there are non-vegetarians, vegetarians, vegans, and within non-vegetarians, there could be segments who are like flexitarians who are trying to reduce their meat consumption. So within each of these consumer groups, again, there would be different need states or occasions on which they are having meat. Say somebody could be having it for nutrition, vis-a-vis somebody could be having it for indulgence, or like something like a special occasion, there's a birthday or like there's a festival. So there are multiple need states for which meat is consumed. And as a consumer, I would be looking at different sets of products for different need states that I have. Say when I'm looking for a special occasion, maybe I could be looking at something like a biryani, or maybe if I'm looking for satisfying some of my cravings, I could be looking at a different set of products, say some kebabs or something. Or if I'm a consumer who's health conscious and I'm looking for nutrition, maybe then I'm looking at something like a grilled chicken. So what is important is to segment this market and identify the type of consumer and their need states and develop the right products and right messaging that cater to each one of these need states. But one thing that runs common across all these segments, as GFI says, is taste, price, convenience. We haven't seen any product which only promises, say, protein or like health or hygiene succeed without having these taste, price, convenience as the foundation. So this has to be kept in mind while developing any product mix in normal meat or in the alternative protein sector.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think, as you said, Raji, overall, with respect to a lot of these things, there are a few basically what are called hygiene factors that need to be satisfied, right? As you said, which are taste, price, convenience. If you don't align with those, then it's highly unlikely you'll find a large market of consumers. And then within that broader landscape, you can position yourself as a healthful product, as a specifically fast food type product, or different things that are satisfying different need states, as you say, in the different consumers in the population. Dhruvi, I'll turn to you now, and I want to ask you a question about why Indian consumers specifically are unique. So, for example, we have some data about Indian consumers specifically being eager to eat fresh food, not frozen food. There's also some preference around home cooked versus outside food. How do you process all of this information? Because there can be quite a gap oftentimes between what people say versus what they actually do.
Yep, absolutely. So there is definitely this gap that exists between what people say they do and what they actually land up doing. And that's seen time and again when you look at, purchase receipts versus theoretical question answers about consumers. While this is true everywhere in the world and not just India, I'll focus in on India, of course, for our episode and, our sector. And in a recent survey that was done by a huge market research leader, it said that around 46% of Indians say that they would think that staying healthy is like a top life priority for them. Having said that, 64% of the same set of people said that they do not exercise. So, there's clearly this gap, and this is illustrated time and again through different surveys like this. But having said that, there are ways to navigate this also, while just keeping in mind certain things, depending on what you want your product to be. So, ordering in for Indians is a lot about indulgence, celebrating, hosting people at home, while eating or making food at home is more about a nutritious meal and wholesome food. So taking on those cues while formulating or branding your product makes sense, along with the fact that, people have a new approach and a new lens towards health, but they will never sacrifice it for taste. So you don't have to go one way or the other, but there is a whole new middle ground of guilt-free indulgence that's also emerging. So, things which are less bad, things that are not entirely healthy, they're definitely tasty, but they are somewhat healthy is what these products promise to consumers. There are other things as well, like all packaged food not being bad and all fresh food not being good. So we need to definitely explore this a bit further. But there are things like coconut milk or fresh cream or idli batter, which Indians purchase very readily as packaged food and still claim for them to be healthy. So, these are all different sorts of sides to the Indian consumer that we need to explore further. The other thing is that while customers are seeking convenience, they're not looking to replicate the entire cooking process, because experimenting with your food, having your own personal signature to it is what also makes it special. So I know it's very confusing because there are a lot of contradictions, but we just need to keep in mind all these things and then look at our specific product and fit it into all these different scenarios.
On that note, we'll take a short break, but please don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more on Feeding 10 Billion Season 2.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you haven't been following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. Their support is much appreciated. Before I tell you about some of the shows that we have for you this week, I really wanted to really point out the incredible efforts of our host and our team. We've been able to maintain most of our production schedule in this lockdown, which is going into 4 months now. And I couldn't be happier with the fact that our hosts and team have been able to just get all of this stuff out so incredibly well. So I just really, really wanted to call them out for that and thank them for their support in this time. And since I spent so much time talking about that, and I want to get you out of here quickly, let me give you a quick update on a few shows that you should check out this week. On Siders, we had Amish Tripathi, really interesting discussion, both of them dive deep into history. Monty Panesar was on Edges and Sledges, another really cool show. On Advertising is Dead, Tanmay Bhatt showed up. That was a cool episode. Malini Agarwal, also probably better known as Miss Malini, showed up on Absolutely Right. It's just been an absolutely gangbusters week in terms of the kind of guests we've had and the conversations we've had on the network. Please do check some stuff out. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Welcome back. You're listening to Feeding 10 Billion. Can we drill down into the protein deficiency and flexitarian angle a little more? We've mentioned earlier in this podcast about how 70% of Indians identify as non-vegetarians, but that also includes eggs. And Varun mentioned that we had a study done about how there was a high acceptance rate for plant-based meats as well as cultivated meat among Indians vis-a-vis their Chinese or American counterparts. And also 80% of Indians are not getting the protein intake we need to get. And it's far lower than the daily recommended average, right? So when we're solving for our malnutrition needs or catering to our palates, how do the known knowns help us figure out more about the known unknowns? And can you tell us about how we're trying to do that with our consumer-focused agenda?
Yeah, Ramya, that is true. I mean, it's truly fascinating, this whole entire trend around protein and what consumers really think about when we say the word protein to them. Because, for instance, a lot of surveys say that consumers don't even recognize what protein is necessarily good for. So they sometimes think, as it being something that improves their immunity. While this is true to a certain extent, it's certainly not the view like the rest of the world has about it being a proper macronutrient and center of plate. Along with that, Indian consumers are unique in the sense that a lot of them recognize different sources of protein as special in their own unique way. So, they'll recognize chickpeas or chana, as we call it in India, to be very wholesome. So that is what resonates with them rather than just saying protein rich. So we need to obviously investigate a lot of this in a lot more detail before having very clear answers. But what we're looking to find across our consumer research and market research work this year is that what are these red flags? What are these commonly done mistakes that brands need to avoid while launching products in the category? What ingredients should they look at formulating with? Because that's the first question, right? You need to first formulate these products. So what ingredients are coming up top when they're resonating with consumers? Also, we're going to obviously look at this whole protein debate that I spoke about earlier in a more granular fashion. And we're using a lot of fascinating tools, to map this out. So we're looking at doing social media listening. We're looking at deep learning via sensory reactions. We're also going to dive into very specific sectors like cultivated meat and sustainable seafood, which are fairly new compared to plant-based, and look at how that industry can move forward through consumer research, in the sense that we're first looking at doing the qualitative part of the study. So when I say qualitative, what I mean is that we're first trying to identify the whats and the whys. So why is a consumer behaving a certain way? What will make them gravitate towards this? What do they not like? And then going into how much and how many, which is the quantitative part of things. Those answers will help us actually define how much is the consumer willing to pay and how many consumers are there really. So a lot of brands and a lot of other research agencies do it the other way around, but we've tried to flip this because I think the category in India is so new and we need to really figure out the first important definitions before diving into the volume-based questions here. So the objective of all of this research by the end of it is to really let the company be empowered with information that will help them exactly which segment should they market to, at what prices, what kinds of products, going into details of packaging, labeling, all really important in India because, one launch which is controversial or one launch that it doesn't do well or sit right with consumers could actually mean a delay for a lot of other brands because consumers then just get miffed with that category for a while. So we want to avoid that and we want to do it the right way via having research and consumer insights on our side.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating is we'll actually have a broad swath of possible approaches that make sense. And that's how you get a thriving market, right? To satisfy, as Raji was saying, those various need states that exist in different ways, which is great. So speaking about that diversity in the market, let's talk income. This is a question for both of you, Raji and Dhruvi. We know that for the BRICS countries, India falls into a low income bracket. We're in this kind of lower middle income trap with World Bank estimating that our gross national per capita income is about rupees 1.4 lakhs, which is roughly $2,000. So the pathways we define for alternative protein success in India absolutely must include this broad base of consumption and not just the top end of the market, right? Because that's why we exist in India, why we're doing what we're doing is as incomes rise, we have to be able to plug that demand with products that appeal to consumers on the basis of what they care about. In fact, these pathways in India could define or influence how other low and middle income countries decide to forge ahead with new products as well, because it could be quite influential. So how much does this depend on just the price of the products in the whole taste, price, convenience trinity? And how much should entrepreneurs be focusing on just price parity? So can we talk about what the playbook is here to broadening this base of consumption to include not just the early adopter? Raji, would you like to go first?
Varun. So when you look at India's economy right now, it's a bottom of the pyramid economy. However, if you look at any projections, in the next decade, we are going to be a truly middle class economy. So where majority of our households are going to move from the lower income into the lower middle and upper middle incomes. So we also have a young demographic with a typical median age of about 28. And when we look at our TV penetration or internet penetration, we are pretty high. So we almost have 70% of households which have TV. And we also have about 500 million internet users already and looking at 1 billion users soon. So with this kind of demographic and exposure, I don't see much difference in the awareness or the aspirations for the lower income groups compared to the higher income groups. So what the lower income groups currently lack is the purchasing power. So even when we look at the consumption of meat also, we don't see much difference in the types of meat consumed across income classes. What is the difference that we see is maybe the frequency with which the lower income groups purchase or the average quantity that they buy for each of those occasions. So basically these lower income groups are not looking for any products that are, say, compromised because they can't afford them at this point of time. No, they are also looking for similar kind of products. So when we look at alternative protein sector also, one has to look at developing products that are aspirational, products that meet the consumer need states, which we've spoken earlier also, the products that meet their, say, aspiration or taste or indulgence. So we'll have to keep those things on focus rather than only focusing on the price. Because any of those products, if you look at the past examples, products which are only focused on the price but not focused on the right product features or like the right aspirational levels haven't really taken off. So the route to approach this is maybe once we build the awareness and aspiration for this set of products and also come out with the right products, then in case if the price points are not matching, if you are not able to attain, say, parity with the conventional meat products, then we'll have to figure out smart ways of packaging them. If you look at examples from FMCG sector, there are a lot of premium brands in shampoos or chocolates or multiple categories. So once they've developed the brand and the aspirations, they try to reach the lower income groups by making, say, low price packs. So you would see the rupees 5, rupees 10, rupees 20 packs stocked across multiple kiranas. Or even if you look at the journey of multiple Western QSRs when they've entered India, none of them have started with the value platforms. They started with the premiumness because at that point of time, they could not offer price parity with the conventional eating out formats that India had, say the roadside vendors or the Indian fast foods. So they had to enter through the premium route. But over a period of time, once they have established the brand, once they've set the aspiration, once they've worked on the business, supply chain, ingredients, etc., then they've opened the doors for the mass consumption through offering value menus and or like to customizing products which suit their price points. So it's a journey there. So to me, I think we'll have to lead through the need states and the right product rather than through the price point at this point of time.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Raji. I mean, that's bang on. That's exactly how I envision this category, growing beyond its early base as well. The other thing is, in India, there's often this misconception of Indians in general, and especially larger Indians at mass, to be quite neophobic towards their food. So people assume that Indians won't try new things or they're very set in their ways. But firstly, I mean, our early theoretical studies and acceptance numbers, which are so high towards plant-based meat and cultivated meat, prove that wrong. But along with that, there are also real-life examples that prove that wrong, right? Like you have your Maggies and Nescafe coffees of the world doing so well at such a large scale, which just means that once you are able to, position a product with the right aspirational cues, but also with the right customization. So that can be either through the influencers you pick to market your product, which have more of a resonance with the mass audience, or whether it is to do with the package size, like Raji mentioned. All of it in the right mix can really drive that story forward. But, it's a patient story, and brands need to be patient for their products to actually percolate down to each income segment. So that's definitely one thing that I would add there.
Dhruvi, if we look at pathways to market, right, especially post-COVID-19, it would be probably fair to say that retail is going to be a much better bet for alternative protein products to get to the market rather than food service or restaurants. And in any case, we seem to be moving away from an eating out or ordering in culture to mostly cooking at home culture, right? And this is obviously a new trend which has emerged during lockdown. So are we going to have to look at tweaking product offerings accordingly? For example, ready to cook versus ready to eat, like you mentioned earlier, or allowing consumers to discover that all packaged food is not bad or all fresh food isn't good. So what habits do you think we'll return to post-COVID-19? And how will that influence the way alternative protein evolves here?
Yeah, Ramya. So absolutely, you're right. The whole COVID-19 crisis has caused a lot of behavior change, especially when it comes to eating. So consumers are recreating their favorite recipes at home. They are, looking up quick and easy ways to make their favorite fancy restaurant meals and recreate them in their kitchens. And in fact, a recent report by Bain, the consulting firm, as well as Flipkart, the e-commerce brand, was studying consumer mindsets around, COVID-19 and what those changes were. And they saw a very high growth in e-commerce, especially within smaller cities and tier 2 geographies. So these are also emerging as, new volume heavy occasions. But while I agree that these are great new occasions for interaction and additional opportunities for brands to interact with consumers, I don't think that eating out or the restaurant culture is frankly going anywhere. Going to a restaurant for a meal, being served with your family, it's an experience that is still here to stay, even after we're at the end of this crisis. And these will, according to me, still remain some of the primary ways of getting in touch with your consumer and primary ways of making them experiment with their food. Because let's consider, right, the case of pasta. It was only made at home and only sold by, huge companies like ITC, for instance, in retail, after it was tried and tested as first a very fancy food and then eventually as even a QSR dish. So this takes time. But I don't think the restaurant occasion, for instance, is going anywhere. There are things that are being added, I would say, rather than being subtracted. So, things like wellness and added customer interaction. We were anyway moving towards more transparency, brands interacting with consumers through comments, more on social media. But this has just accelerated all of that because consumers are now seeking out answers. How do I make this? Can I add this to this dish, right? And they're seeking out education. There's also definitely a rise in demand for a brand in general, because that assured seal of quality when it comes to hygiene, when it comes to packaging, is resonating well with consumers. And I think that's here to stay. So I would say it's a mixed bag, definitely added opportunities rather than subtracted ones for our sector.
So I agree with Dhruvi. So I don't think eating out is going anywhere. What I see is maybe we can see some changes in the dynamics. So if you look at eating out, the Indian landscape is dominated by your roadside vendors. So where hygiene was always a question in the consumer's mind. So with these fears of COVID, etc., maybe some of that sector could take a hit. I think instead what will happen is maybe the cloud kitchens are anyways on an increase. So the proportion of sales maybe from the takeouts might go up compared to dine-in in the short run. But otherwise, the overall sector, I think, is going to stay strong. It has a strong potential to revive after all of this gets over. So I don't think we should lose focus on eating out or the food services industry because it's not doing well right now. So one has to focus both on the food services industry and retail, which is also seeing like interesting trends which happened during the last few months. So like one of the terms which I could use for retail maybe now is I think a leapfrogging which has happened in the sector. So we always had this cycle of journey of where we'll have the traditional trade and then people will upgrade to the modern trade outlets and then slowly move on to the e-commerce. I think this entire COVID thing has eliminated the modern trade link in between, and a lot of consumers have directly upgraded from traditional trade to the e-commerce in the last few months. So therefore, for us as a sector for alternative proteins, the focus needs to be there both on retail and the food service sector. So some of the other things which come to my mind about the trends that we're seeing in the last few months are, one is there's a lot of demand for the branded commodities now because of the hygiene or the safety or the quality that these brands offer. So I think that is one of the favorable trends for the sector. And also there is, like Dhruvi spoke about, there is a lot of experiential cooking that is happening at home. So I think that is one trend that might continue. Brands are already latching on to this opportunity and they're making out and they're coming up with pre-packaged meal kits along with the recipes, so which will make the entire cooking much easier. So I think that's again one of those interesting opportunities that the sector could explore. And consumers, I think, would continue to be health conscious and they will invest in organic products. They will invest in products that are immunity boosting. And there will be a trend where consumers will look for vegan products and vegetarian products. So therefore, all of these, I think, are going to be like favorable trends for these alternative proteins.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, overall, there's so many things that are converging right now that are really hard to unpick and figure out how they're going to affect food consumption and ordering and therefore alternative proteins in general. But of course, they do affect it. So for example, even things like working from home over the next years might be something more of a trend than it has been in the past. And so People might want to be ordering in more in terms of their sort of convenience of being able to cook at home. They might look at things like meal kits, as we've mentioned. There are so many things that are moving right now, and we really have to keep observing to see which of them is permanent and which of them kind of reverts to the mean after the COVID-19 crisis is hopefully over. Raji, let's get to the plant-based meat of the matter now. So what are the first product decisions that an entrepreneur should be making? Should they focus on chicken or egg over any other kind of meat replacement because chickens and eggs are eaten so much in India? Should they even be looking at meat, given that's not a mainstay of our meal currently and there's no single meat dish that unites the country? Although, of course, chickens are eaten very widely. And should they be focusing on niche ingredients or just trying to solve for everything?
So I think the market for these alternative proteins is going to be huge in India because we know the kind of average per capita consumption we have as a country when it comes to meat. So I think we are one of the countries which are at the bottom of the pyramid when it comes to the meat consumption. So our average per capita consumption is about 3.5 kilos compared to US, which has about 100 kilos per annum per consumer, or a China, which consumes almost 50 kilos per person per annum. So therefore, looking at that kind of average per capita that we have, and with the incomes that are increasing and other favorable trends, I think there's a huge opportunity for alternative proteins in the coming years. But however, when we look at different proteins, which one to focus on, we'll have to understand the market much, much better. So we'll have to have a clear understanding of the target consumers and also the market. So when we talk about the consumer, like we've spoken earlier, there are different sets of consumers in the market. So there are vegetarians, there are certain set of consumers who has only egg but doesn't have any other proteins. Or there are non-vegetarians, and again within them there are certain subsections. People who want to increase their meat consumption vis-a-vis people who want to reduce their meat consumption. So there are multiple subsets in it. So we will have to have a thorough understanding of their consumption patterns today in terms of, say, what are the sources of protein today and what are the reasons or the need states why they are having it. Say, suppose the milk and eggs, when they are having it, they could be scoring high on, say, affordability or nutrition vis-a-vis a meat, which could be scoring high on, say, aspiration or indulgence or like a craving. So we'll have to understand for each one of these protein, what are the need states or the reason that's driving that purchase. Apart from that, some of the consumption basics like what frequency do these consumers buy, what is the kind of quantity do they buy, the amount that is spent on them, and which are the key forms in which they are consuming them. Suppose somebody could be for some particular occasion, I could be making a biryani versus some other occasion where I have a keema or the typical curries that Indian consumers make. So there is a landscape of products that are made depending on the need state. So these factors, along with the awareness or the willingness to try these alternative proteins, these all put together will help us in arriving the market sizing. So once we have the market sizing, we know which are the big segments. So we know these big segments by different consumers and then different proteins or different occasions. So then the brands or the entrepreneurs can pick and choose which are the ones that they will want to shortlist for now and then maybe for the medium term or the long term. So this consumer data, along with the market data, say different proteins have different kinds of technology that is needed. So some of them could be complex and some of them could be simple. Say if you have to replicate a plant-based dairy, so maybe, I don't know, the technology could be much simpler there compared to, say, a plant-based fish or a plant-based lamb. So therefore, they'll have to keep in mind the kind of technology that is needed and also the competition that is there in each of the segments and the availability of supply chain, different ingredients, government policies, tax incentives. So all of these market criteria, so all of them put together, we'll have to analyze. So with only a few people with that kind of per capita consumption that we have, and only with a 5 to 6% of the population who's having, say, eggs or meat on a daily basis, there is massive opportunity across segments of protein, right from milk to eggs to chicken. And there is also massive opportunity at both ends of the spectrum, right from the mass end to the niche or the premium products. So brands and entrepreneurs will have to study the market a little more, and they'll have to understand the market sizing. They'll have to understand competition, technology, and their own synergies within their own ecosystem. So combining all this data, I think one should shortlist and also prioritize what is going to be their priority protein in the short term, medium term, and the long term. But I can definitely say that there is huge opportunity across the proteins that we have identified.
Right. So, Dhruvi, what pitfalls do you think should any alternative protein product avoid for sure when they're doing this sizing up of the market or the consumer that Raji mentioned? If you had to debunk some myths, what are the top 3 that you would like to demolish? And I'm asking this because, as you know, it's hard to even qualify some basic things as stuff we take for granted, right? People still don't understand that the products that the alternative protein sector makes is for non-vegetarians, or that our protein consumption is likely to grow in the next 2 decades. But beyond that, what are the sort of myths that they should disabuse themselves of right away?
Yeah, you're right. So I think the first huge myth that needs to be debunked is calling plant-based meat mock meat or vegan meat. And I understand why brands actually go towards this route, because they feel like consumers who are health conscious, who are trying to go off animal proteins, are the first target segment. And they try and then exclusively market to that target segment. But then by doing so, they actually pigeonhole themselves and barricade themselves to a much larger audience set, which is people who actually enjoy meat, love eating meat, and would love new ways of having meat. So I think that's the first huge thing that brands need to keep in mind. Do not call it mock meat. Do not call it vegan meat. Plant-based meat is so much more, fresher sounding. It has a farm-to-table connotation. It's more inclusive. And we should stick to terms that, resonate better with larger audiences, in my opinion. The other huge thing is aping Western formats and Western ingredients. So again, I can understand the temptation that a marketer may have, right? Like burgers have been doing so well for the past 2 years. They're all you read about when you look up the sector online. And there is a temptation then to go towards those formats. And while that's great, I think you need to look at wider formats, which actually can be made into different things. So look at creating a format that can work well as a burger, but also as a tikka. Look at minces, look at keema. So don't just limit yourself to one format, because then that has a shorter shelf life in terms of audience perception and audience acceptance. The other thing is going it alone. I think in a new category like this, the more partners, the better. As ecosystem builders, obviously GFI is very keen to make sure these collaborations happen, but they're also key for startups and for companies to succeed. So partnerships can be in various ways or formats, but some examples are tying up with incubation centers so that you can actually network with the right professionals and the right VCs, tying up with the right universities for R&D and research at the back end. Then when you're actually closer to launching your product, if you're a startup, for instance, you can tie up with a bigger brand and come to an understanding. You can tie up with a QSR chain. For instance, Metro, which is this huge food business, actually has an incubation center called NX Food, where they do such interesting collaborations where they take young startups, they take their new dishes and they actually pilot them with airlines and look at consumer reactions to those dishes while they're being served on air. So those sorts of things are all up there, and they just require a little more push and a little more research, but they will take your brand very, very far. So don't go it alone.
All right. Yes, I don't think anyone's going to have to go it alone in the ecosystem that we're building, because I think that there's a lot of goodwill in the early stage startup ecosystem currently from all the actors that Dhruvi just mentioned, whether it's investors, large corporations, and of course, incubators, etc. So I'm going to close by asking the question we always ask, which is, the year is 2050. What is your average day like, and what do you think we'll be eating in that time?
Wow, 2050, that sounds like a long way to go, but I really hope that by then, what we're seeing in terms of studies which say that 60% of the meat we're going to be eating will be consumed from sources like plant-based meat and cultivated meat is, what we see all around us in practice. And I, for one, cannot wait for that. I think COVID-19 in general has already shown people the dangers of just eating the way we were eating. And I hope we're living in a world where everyone's a lot more aware. Those perils are accounted for and nobody has to sacrifice on taste or on price to get the protein that they like or to get the taste that they want or the dish that they love. So that's what I hope happens by 2050.
Yes, I think that's a long way ahead. 30 years from now, I can't even imagine what I would be doing. But I'm hoping that the younger generations would be far more mindful. We'll have to play a role in creating that. So I'm hoping that we are more mindful and then we make the younger generations more mindful. And then we all would be evaluating food not only from the perspective of, say, taste, price, convenience, but also from the perspective of sustainability and planet. We should be looking at coexisting with the nature and be more mindful in everything we do on a day-to-day basis. And when it comes to eating, I'm assuming maybe we'll turn a lot more vegetarian and we'll have a lot of options of protein, alternative protein products, be it both plant-based and cultured meat, which would compete with the traditional meat on every front, right from like the taste or the price or convenience or the number of forms that it could be offered. So long way to go, yes, I think, but we will be there.
Yeah, we hope so too. And we think that will happen, but there's a lot of work to do before we get there. So thank you both for sharing with us the key insights on how we will actually get there and how we're going to appeal to all the people that want to eat these kinds of foods or have these need states, as we've talked about so much during this episode. Thank you so much for being on Feeding 10 Billion.
Thank you so much, Varun. Thank you, Ramya. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you, guys. This was great.
So Ramya, that was a lot of information, and it can get really confusing for entrepreneurs, investors, and large companies. I mean, we've had so many of these conversations over the last couple of years, and we've got the sense that really a lot of them are looking to us to create a lot of this research on the market and consumer side. And of course, there's a difference between what consumers say and what they'll do. And there are all sorts of positions that products can occupy in the market. So whether that's trying to create buzz with high-end launches, whether it's focusing on health messaging, focusing on the guilt-free taste of meat, eggs, and dairy, playing up the cultural aspects of vegetarianism on certain days of the week, etc. But ultimately, the truth is that none of this is even possible without satisfying the basic hygiene factors of taste, price, and convenience. This is especially true in a place like India, where the size of the early adopter market is large in absolute numbers, but it's spread out over a number of different cities, right? And the buying power isn't as high as, let's say, Singapore or New York. Companies here have a seriously high bar to hit in terms of the taste and the cost basis.
That's right, Varun. And beyond that, there's plenty of tactical intelligence that can inform an entrepreneur's go-to-market plan, their positioning, labeling, and a lot of other stuff. And this could include informing consumers about all the environmental benefits or staying away from that kind of messaging or any of the approaches you mentioned. So Varun, that's what's beautiful about this, that different entrepreneurs can make different choices. And that's what will contribute to a thriving, diverse market.
That's right. And as entrepreneurs in India take their first steps in the local and global markets, we're deeply excited to support their experiments. And we look forward to seeing that diversity play out. I mean, I always say that my mother will definitely reach for the millet-based product whenever that's on the shelves, while I may reach for the cultivated meat. We need diverse choices for everybody. That's how we're going to feed 10 billion.
And if you want to start a company in this space or are interested in just learning more about this sector as a researcher or want to collaborate, please do reach out. You can also join our GF Ideas India Smart Protein Innovation community on LinkedIn or follow us on social media. We are Good Food India on Twitter and the Good Food Institute India on Instagram. And we leave all those URLs as well as the LinkedIn URL in our description.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am at VarunD7 on Twitter and at Varun5 on Instagram. You can come ask me why.
And if you want to reach out to me, I'm Cryptic Caprice on Twitter and Dithering Funambulist on Instagram. Please don't ask me why. We look forward to having you with us every week. And of course, if you'd like to be part of accelerating the future of our food system, please just get in touch. You can email us at india@gfi.org.
My name is Varun Deshpande, Managing Director at the Good Food Institute India.
And I'm Ramya Ramurthy, the Communication Specialist at the Good Food Institute India. And you have been a part of Feeding 10 Billion Season 2.
Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Don Bradman, and now Cyrus Brocha. Okay, probably not in the right company. I mean, Don Bradman is Australian. But it's called Cyrus Says, a wonderful show about everything. Find the show on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.